kind of feel like I'm preaching to the choir here with all you certified master gardener folks, and I'm just a little lowly person that digs in the soil. But I've kind of looked through this handout that Richard prepared. There's really some really good information in there, so be sure that you get one of those before you leave. I guess to start with, we'll kind of start off with kind of the basics, and the first thing you need to kind of always think about is the location of your garden, where you're going to put it. Sometimes that may be based on your location as far as, do you have space around the home, or do you have, going somewhere else? Ideally, you want to have it fairly close to the house, because this makes it more convenient, when you get out there to go into doing the work in the garden, preparing it, tilling, planting, harvesting, and so forth, if it's close to the house. With that being said, you need to also consider a source of water. Again, ideally if you can run some water out there to it, but like my situation, I don't have water there, so I have to, run a hose out there as far as the irrigation part of it goes. Another thing you want to consider is and you don't have any control over this, is the type of soil that you have in your garden. Ideally, you'd like to have a loam soil, but if you have a clay or a sandy soil, you can kind of, a little bit later on, we'll try to tell you some things that you can do with that. But that's one of the things that you don't really have a lot of control over. Again, another thing as far as location is you want to try to get it where you're not in a lot of shade area, because growing your plants and so forth, you need a lot of sun, especially like with a vegetable garden. Now, if you're doing some ornamentals, some of those are fairly shade tolerant. You can kind of get away with that. But most of your garden plants are going to need full sun, or at least 5 to 6 hours of sun during the day. So we're going to kind of look at that as far as you have. Then we want to look at soil test, and again we're going to talk a little bit about that. But you should have probably done that 2 months ago. It's a little late now because even if you get it in, be good enough for your fall garden, but the soil lab over there at A&M, they're probably a month behind now on running samples because of so many coming in, not just gardeners, but farmers and ranchers, turning it in. All right, so we've kind of picked out where you're going to establish your garden as far as the location and so forth of it. I recommend that you start out small. You get there and this is your first time, say, I want to do something big as this room here where I can plant, corn, beans, potatoes, this and that. After you go up and down about 3-4 times here, hoeing and pulling weeds, you're going to look over here, golly, I still got a lot more to go. So start out small. You can always expand. And you really would be surprised at the amount that you can grow in a small space if you're, concentrated, plan what you're going to plant, and kind of put some thought into when you're going to plant and harvest and so forth. A small space will do a lot. After a year or two, then you can always expand. But again, recommend that you start out small and go with that. All right, in your establishing your new one, you're going to have to get rid of the grass, and then there's several ways of doing that. One is just to, can you get in there and till it up, and then pull the grass and weeds out of there, and then till and keep it like that. If you use a herbicide, be careful, because some of those things have a fairly long restriction on there as far as when you can plant. So be sure you read the label on some of those products before you start to using them. After you get the grass out and kind of get it established, then you're going to need some way of working the soil. Now, In the little handout there I was looking in there, they were showing where you take the old shovel and till it and flop the soil all over and so forth. Again, that might work pretty good for a small garden, but if you're anything size, you probably need to invest in a tiller, or if your neighbor has one, that you can borrow, do that, and use a tiller on the soil to break it up. I have a fairly big tiller, and then I've got a little small tiller I think it's a Mathis tiller. It works really nice, once you get your garden established and your rows tilling the soil in there. Then the next thing that you need to do as far as the garden is normally you're going to have to add some organic matter. Okay, this is where you can kind of improve the soil that you have. If you've got a sandy soil, organic matter is almost essential. You need it to help maintain moisture and hold your nutrients. If you have a clay soil, the clay soil is going to hold water. What you're needing there is some aeration of the soil. So the organic matter is going to help improve the quality of your clay soil. Your texture is going to be the same. You can't ever change the texture of the soil, but you can improve the structure of it. So this organic matter in your in your sandy soils, it's going to help hold the water and help hold your nutrients. Sand particles, if you're kind of looking at those compared to all the others, sand particles, if you think it'd be about the size of a softball, your loam soils is going to be about the size of a golf ball, and your clay particles, you can compare it to the size of a BB. So that's kind of a comparison of the size of the granules. So these big softball sized things of sandy soil, when you get a rain, it goes right on through that stuff, and then what fertilizer and nutrients you got there, it's washed down into the soil. On down into the subsoil. So a sandy soil, you've got to have that organic matter there to kind of help maintain and hold that water and nutrients in there. So that's to get that. All right, so you got your soil in there, you've improved it with a little bit of your organic matter. The next thing is to start laying out your rows. And you can ask her, I can't lay out a straight row. I don't know. I have all the intentions of the world of laying it out, but I think maybe I need to take my tiller to an alignment shop or something, because it just seems to pull one way or the other. So, it gets prettied up, and you look down through there, and your row's got a little curve to it, or 2 or 3 curves. But anyway, always got a good intention.
Get more plants in there, though.
That's my dad always said, you can always plant more on a crooked row.
Yeah.
Probably because it's longer. But anyway, so, and then as far as your row spacings, again, in this little handout that Richard has for you, it gives you some recommendations. Again, if you're kind of got a small space, you may want to compact your rows a little bit tighter than some of those recommendations. If you've got a lot of space, then you can maybe expand your rows, because I think in a couple of those places, they're recommending about 30 inches or something like that from row to row. But again, you can kind of compress it depending on your plant that you're going to put in there also, or the type of crop that you're going to be growing. Another thing that we kind of get in a hurry with, and I know I do, is you're in a hurry to try to get things planted early, because you want to try to be the first one on the block, so to speak, to have green beans growing and so forth. So you need to kind of wait for that soil temperature to get up to about 65 degrees. That's, again, one of the recommendations that they give there. If you plant it early, those seeds are going to lay there, and they may sprout and rot, and die because of the cold. So just kind of be patient and wait as far as the planting time. Because again, if you've got a little small garden and, it takes 2 handfuls of green bean seeds to plant, and they don't come up, you've lost $2 and 30 minutes of work. So, you hadn't found out a lot. Not like if you were doing a commercial crop, or, patch or so forth. Yes, sir.
How do you determine your soil temperature?
Thermometer?
Put a
Yes,
thermometer
sir.
in the soil?
Yes, sir.
Are you talking surface temperature or how far?
You need to
down?
go down about your planting depth, 3 to 4 inches, because that's, where your your seeds are going to be. So I've got to mention that, but if you have a question, ask it, or ideally, if you've got it, write it down, clip it to a 20, and then give it to Richard, then we'll get back to you a little bit later.
I like that idea.
But if you have a question, ask it, because if I don't, I know there's lots of knowledge in here that somebody else can answer it. Because again, I'm up here because of mistakes. So just remember that. All right, we've got our garden ready. Now we're ready to start planting things or figuring out what you're going to plant. And I know how we got on the mailing list, but we get like 10 or 15 seed catalogs from everywhere in the world. Some of them, come from way up north and so forth, and you go to looking through there, and you see all these different varieties of beans or corn and beets and everything. A lot of that stuff is not ideally suited for our location, so again, just kind of look through there and say, oh, that's kind of nice, that's kind of nice. Again, Richard has spent 3 or 4 hours developing a list of varieties recommended for Leon County that's in this handout. So kind of look at some of those varieties, before you start thumbing through that seed catalog from Michigan, and ordering stuff from up there. Because what's suited for theirs, not ideally suited for us. So look at those things. And when you're planting, just plant what you're going to use. And everybody, you think, oh, I want to plant this or that or whatever, or try this. But try to limit it to things that you're going to want. I don't like Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, so we don't plant that. So just try to plant what you need, are going to use. The amount, again, kind of depends on if you're going to use it for fresh or if you're planning on, canning it, freezing, processing, then, you may want to plant a little bit more of certain things. She likes to do the Roma tomatoes because she's processing it into the sauce for making marinara sauce and so forth. So we plant several of the Roma varieties of tomatoes, or for canning purposes, so that we'll have enough. All right. Again, as you kind of figured out what all you're going to plant, you need to kind of group your crops according to either a cool or warm season plants. In one section of your garden, have all your cool season things, like your spinach, lettuce, greens, mustard, so forth. And then another little section for your warm season, beans, corn, things like that. And the reason you want to do that is so that when all these cool season plants play out because of the heat, then you can go in there and you've got a whole nother section that you can plant some other crops in, for warm season. And grow those so you constantly got your garden in some type of production instead of just laying idle. Because a few years ago, I kind of made a mistake of planting some some cool season crops and then some warm, and so I kind of had a little block in the garden there, that I had lettuce and spinach and like that planted in, and then around it with some other warm season things, so it was kind of inconvenient as far as trying to get things planted and growing and so forth. So kind of take some time and get you a little piece of paper and sketch out your garden, of what you want to plant and where. Do that. Also, while I'm thinking about that, is you want to rotate your crops each year. If you got your garden and you always plant potatoes here and then tomatoes and so forth and so on, after a while, you'll get some disease problems built up in your soil from some of those crops. So rotate them around, move them to a different part of the garden. But again, keep your cool season and warm season separate. Also, you want to try to watch your maturity time of your plants. Some of them are fairly short growing season. You got some medium and long season type crops. And again, they break it down real good in this handout that he has here, that you can look in there as far as age, the time it takes these crops to mature. Also, in selecting your crops, depending on your garden size, you may want to limit some of the things that you grow, especially like your vine crops, watermelons, cantaloupes, pumpkins, things like that. A few years back, she wanted to plant some pumpkins for the grandkids to have, and we put out like 2, and those jokers almost took over the whole garden. I mean, those pumpkin vines was growing everywhere, out in the garden, in the yard, in the pasture. So if you have a small space, you might want to either not plant or limit the number of those crops that you grow. I know you've seen a lot of times that with like cantaloupes, for instance, you can kind of grow them on a trellis, and then once they start putting the melons on, you can support them with some netting or something like that tied up to the trellis to kind of confine the space of those things. But one plant will take, like a 6x6 area, and grow out. So again, with a small space, you kind of have to limit, look at the space requirements of some of these crops that you're going to be growing. All right, so we figured out what we're going to plant. So now it's come time to plant your crops and so forth. So look at your spacing requirements. I like to go ahead and plant them fairly thick, and then you can always, once they come up 2 to 3 inches or something like that, or even earlier, you can go in there and thin out those crops. Like if your green beans, for instance, if you've got them fairly thick, you go in there and pull some out, or if you've got a skip in the row, you can pull some of these up, and transplant them to another part of the row. And that way, because invariably you'll have some skips in the row, or I always do anyway. So some of y'all may, every seed may come up. But again, that's kind of go along with those. On planting your seeds, a recommended depth is usually about twice the width of the seed. So don't plant a spinach seed as deep as you would a green bean seed, for instance, because it's not, you're not going to get very good results with it. I have a hard time. I have to try to watch myself when I'm planting like the mustard, greens, and spinach, because I have a tendency to try to, put too much soil on top of the crop when I'm planting it. So just a real light dusting of soil over those seeds, and then some of the others, you can go with that. And was talking with Richard earlier, when you go out this year looking for some of your transplants like tomatoes and peppers and squash and so forth, you're going to see a big difference between this year and last year. I know, like last year, you could get tomatoes and pepper plants that were already 6 to 8 inches tall. And we were looking the other day, and she found some, and most of the tomato plants that we looked at several different places, and they were only like 3 or 4 inches tall. The pepper plants, they were real short. So whether it be the snow or whatever, the quality of the plants, or the size of them, you're going to kind of be shocked this year when you go to looking around, because we were used to finding them pretty good size and so forth. So again, some of those are going to be hard to find. And one rule of thumb that my daughter said, we were talking about planting whatever, and she's was a horticulture major at Sam, and she said one thing you always got to remember is when you're doing transplant, it's green side up. Because all right, now that we've got everything planted, and it's sprouted and come up, you need to kind of at least once a day or every other day or something, just kind of make a walk through with the garden and just kind of see how things are progressing and going. Because a lot of times you get, myself, I get busy and it may be 3 or 4 days before you get out there and you're walking along, and oh my goodness, what's going on here with this? Because you've got a disease or some insects that hit it, and sometimes, it may be too late to try to take care of it, or to control it. So go out there and look at it, and if you can see some weeds coming up, it's a whole lot easier to pull up a few weeds at a time rather than, wait until they're 5 or 6 inches tall and then trying to get them out of your garden, because as you try to pull them up, you're going to pull up some of your plants also. So go with it like, try to just make a day or every other day, walk through that garden and look at it. And if you see a problem coming up, then you can take care of it. All right. After you plant, and then if you mulch around your crops, plants, you can help conserve moisture and warmth and so forth of the soil. Lots of different types of mulches that you can use. And again, they mentioned several in here: straw, commercial mulch, newspapers, things like that. If you use hay, be sure that you know where it came from, because a lot of times producers, are going to spray their hay crops for weeds and so forth. And if you got any type of herbicide residue in that hay, it's going to affect your plants, especially tomatoes. You can put some hay down there that you didn't know was treated with some type of a herbicide, and a week or two later you're going to see some problems with it. Tomatoes are just really, really susceptible to that. I heard one say that you could take an index card, and write the word Roundup on it and walk by them and just point it at that tomato plant, and a week later, it's going to die. So be careful with those, because just warn you on both. Fertilize. If you're using natural or organic, kind of figure out the route you want to go with it. Again, this is ideally you're going to have already know the type of fertilizer or ratio, that you're going to use because of your soil test. If you don't, or hadn't already done the soil test, then just use a good balanced blend fertilizer, like 13, 6, 12, 12, something along those lines for your crops. And then the amount, again, it's going to be based on your soil test. If not, again, they give you some recommendations in there of, trying to think of it, a cup for every 10 foot, something like that. If you have a sandy soil, again, you're going to have to make several applications of fertilizer throughout the season because, again, of that leaching effect. Even if you have some organic matter in your soils, it's going to leach out. So with your sandy soils, you may have to make several applications during the season. A loam soil, you get by with a couple. And you can kind of overdo it, and again, here's Mr. Mistake. I tend to try to want to just take this cup of fertilizer, and put it all around one plant. And then, you go back there and it's got fertilizer shot and you've killed the plant because of too much nitrogen and nutrients in there at one time. So be careful with the amount that you put out. The whole thing, if it's a little bit's good, a whole lot's even better. But kind of watch those amounts. Then again, the number of applications depends upon your soil type that you have. All right. Next thing we'll kind of mention is watering. Hopefully we can depend on Mother Nature to provide our water for us, but here in Texas, that's few and far between. Again, conveniently, you've got your water source out there. The best time to apply it is in the morning. Don't do it late at night because, again, the moisture on the leaves, you're going to just invite disease problems. So if you do it early in the day, the leaves have time to dry off and eliminate some of your disease problems. As far as how you apply it, the easiest is, just one of those little boom sprayers that. But again, you're watering in the furrow where you don't need to, and you're using a lot more water than you need to. So the best is the drip irrigation or soaker hoses, because again, you're putting the water exactly where you want it, and you can control where that water's going and control the amount that you're going to there. Ideally, you want to get the soil moist to about 3 to 4 inches down. It's better to have 1 or 2 good soakings rather than a daily light application. If you water deep, then that's going to cause your roots to grow deeper into the soil, and give the plant more support, be able to pick up more nutrients and so forth. Shallow watering, your roots are going to be fairly close to the top of the soil. So that's the main reason we want to do it, deep watering. And again, with your soaker hoses and so forth. And another thing, mistakes is, you don't ever think about reading the label on a soaker hose. But I got to looking at it and it said, best if you run the hose from the source of the water downhill. And I was running some of mine kind of uphill, and I was wondering, dang, the first 20 foot of this water's good, then on up on the other end, it's not getting any water. Then I got, okay. So kind of look at that, if you can, start it from the top of if your garden has a little bit of a slope, kind of put it on the high end, so that your water gravity flow down instead of trying to force water uphill. As you're looking at your plants out there each day, one of the things that you need to try to do is determine what type of problems you have. Is it a disease problem or is it an insect problem? Because you're going to treat both of those things differently. If it's a disease problem, then you're going to be using some type of fungicide on there to control it. If it's an insect problem, then you're going to treat it differently also. Use the recommended chemical for that particular problem, and then the amount that it says. Don't just it looks like 2 ounces, and pour it in there. So measure, and I recommend that you use a different sprayer for your insecticides and your herbicides, and make sure that you don't swap those out, because however well you think you cleaned out that herbicide sprayer, there could be some residue in there. You go back in there and if the other sprayer's broke, I'll just clean this one up and use it until I get to town and buy another one. So have separate ones, and then after each time you use it, clean them up. Wash them out and run some water through the hose itself. Don't just wash the tank out, because you'll still have some chemical residue in that hose. So make sure that you drain and clean it out also. Some of these chemicals that you use, look at the date before use, because some of them are like 10 to 14 days. So if you've got a crop that's fairly close to being harvested and you spray it, and it's at a 14-day use time on there, your crop's going to be past maturity when you get ready to pick it. So kind of look at those things also. And if you need help with some of that stuff, take a picture of it and send it to Richard. And then if he can't identify it, then he's got folks at A&M that they can work on. I had a problem with corn disease last year. Couldn't figure out what it was, so we took some pictures and sent it to A&M, and then they sent back a recommendation. of what to use, and it worked and corn did fine. You got it ready now, and then it's time to harvest. Ideally, you want to do it in the mornings. That's when you have your best sugar content in your crops, especially like if you're doing sweet corn, melons, and so forth like that. The morning time, you've got your highest sugar content. I get in a hurry of trying to pick crops a lot of times, especially at the first of the year, trying to pick things before it's mature. Like beans and so forth. You want to get out there and get that first crop of beans or peas picked, and you get ready to take them in there, and then, they're not mature or at the stage they need to be. You're trying to shell peas that still need to be on the vine another 4 or 5 days. So kind of check those things, and then after you kind of get an idea of what you're looking for, then you will know, that this particular crop of peas, they need to be a yellow color, and before they're ready to shell and pick. Green beans, you want to try to get them before you can start actually seeing the pod in there, because they're a lot tenderer that way if you can get them at that early stage. Also, some of your crops, especially some of your bell peppers and certain peppers like that, you may be better off to get you a pair of little snips or scissors, knife, and cut those bell peppers off, because invariably if you try to pop them off, you're going to break part of the stem off also. Because I, again, made that mistake. So take time, and clip those things off, rather than breaking off part of your branch. And you want to try, especially if you're going to be processing them, you want to try to have everything ready. And if you're going to be doing corn, you want to pull it that morning, and process it as soon as possible. Get it in the freezer to maintain the quality of that crop that you've grown and worked so hard to try to grow. And I'm trying to think one other thing I was going to say, but again, if you look at it in the long run, it's a whole lot easier to go to H-E-B or Kroger's, and go down their aisle, and then they've got all these pretty vegetables and everything there. And if you probably put the pencil to it, you may not want to do that. But it's just a pride, of growing things for yourself. Excuse me, and doing that as far as the gardening thing. But that's all I have. If you've got questions, excuse me, I will try to answer. Ma'am?
Is it recommended that you test the soil every year?
Oh, yes, at least every 2 years. Every 2 years, and I know all y'all know how to do the soil test, but be sure that you get it in several locations in the garden and go down about 4 to 5 inches. Again, that's where you're going to be growing. Mix it all together, and then take one sample, and send it to one of the labs here, either A&M or I think Stephen F. has one. Yeah. So again, take those and be sure that you go by the office, and Richards has, special sheets for gardens. And then, they've got other ones too, like if you're growing hay and so forth. But get one of those sheets for our garden, and that way they'll know that how to make, what recommendations to make and so forth. And, excuse me, they make just a basic test, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and pH. But go ahead and take a step up and get the micronutrients tested also, because those are important also, and that maybe where some of if you've got some problems, that maybe where some of those are, that you've got deficient in some micronutrients. Any others? All right.